What's going on, everybody? Aidan from Birds vs. Boys here, and as of this recording, we are officially 1 month away from the start of Eagles training camp. It's crazy how fast summer flies by. We've been entertained by baseball and the Phillies playing well, NBA free agency soon, NBA draft tonight as you hear this, but there's nothing quite like the start of football. There's nothing quite like the first time you see them come out of the tunnel at the NovaCare Complex for that first practice, and you know the season's right around the corner. So, crucial season for a variety of reasons, one of them being a few guys have retired, some new guys need to step up, and some, familiar faces we're looking to see a little bit more from this year. So, here are the top 3 Eagles who need to take the next step this year if the Eagles are going to get back to the Super Bowl. So at 1, I am starting on the offensive side of the ball, and it'll be our only offensive member today, but it's going to be Dallas Goedert. And really with Goedert, he's the only one of that group that doesn't have that long-term extension in the skill position players. They've got Saquon locked up now in free agency. They took care of A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Jalen Hurts got his deal last year. They had given Dallas a deal before, but he is actually, they can get out of that contract after this season. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, they don't want to do that with Dallas Goedert. And I agree. I think it'd be far-fetched to believe that they would want to move on from Dallas Goedert after this year. But he is now at the point in age where Zach Ertz was when they moved on from Zach Ertz and traded him to make room for Dallas Goedert. And the other thing with Goedert is I think all of us have believed since that time when they traded Ertz to make room for Dallas Goedert that he had top 5 tight end potential. And as of that time, he has not been a top 5 tight end. This is unfair to say because a lot of that is due to injury. If the Commanders don't pull him down by his face mask and break his collarbone on a face mask that's not called, he doesn't end up on IR. He's probably top 5 in receptions and receiving yards in 2022, but he was not. And even I think at times he kind of gets lost in the offense. A year ago, again, it's not his fault. He ends up on IR, kind of a rough tackle, lands on his wrist, breaks his wrist. He is out. He lands on IR again. So he falls outside of the top 10 last year in both receptions and receiving yards for a tight end. In 2022, he was 7th in receiving yards. He was 12th in receptions. So I think you're looking for a little bit more. You want him to be able to crack those top 5 measurements. We kind of see him in this light that he is of the same value as a Mark Andrews. He's above the Evan Ingrams of the world. Sam Laporta, who's ascending, we thought he'd be like that Sam Laporta ascension. So the TJ Hawkinsons of the world, we thought he was in that category. And as of yet, and in large part due to injury, he has not been. So we went to see him in this full offense, see him healthy across 17 games. Will he be top 5 with some of those names that I mentioned? And I think that takes a lot of pressure off some of these other guys. I think having an offense that isn't totally predicated on the skill of 2 wide receivers and instead has creativity to it and schematics to it will do him a bunch of favors. It will help Jalen Hurts utilize the middle of the field and kind of get an emphasis back on getting Dallas Goedert targets. So I think you could see an uptick in receptions if he stays healthy. So like I said, that was the only offensive guy that I had in the 3. And that makes sense, right? Like, I think we're pretty confident in our offense. We're confident in the pieces that we have, at least, and the structure that they have, bringing in Kellen Moore, locking up all the skill position players. And aside from making sure that Cam Jurgens can take over for Jason Kelce, I think we're pretty confident there on that offensive line. So Dallas Goedert was the one guy. Meanwhile, on the defensive side of the ball, I think we have a lot more questions. So at number 2, I have Nolan Smith. Now, the Philly Special Podcast, they just did an interview with Brandon Graham, which I thought was really good, and kudos to them for having Graham on. But Graham did a great job singing the praises of Nolan Smith, who I think is a guy who kind of gets lost in the shuffle at that position because, one, Brandon Graham's going down in the Ring of Honor with the Eagles when it's all said and done. This is a swan song for him, so we're enjoying the last year of Brandon Graham as a Philadelphia Eagle, and he is a legend at the position. So we focus on him, right? This offseason, Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick, both of them were almost out the door. They bring Josh Sweat back, so there was a focus on him because he was really good in 2022, and he started off good in 2023 and then kind of just hit a wall. His production wasn't there, and I thought we were all expecting a lot more from him. They trade Hassan Reddick. He's been top 5 in sacks and double-digit sacks the past 3 years. So that was kind of came to it as a shock for people. They bring in Bryce Huff. So there's all these interchangings at that position that we kind of lose Nolan Smith sometimes. I think they will need him to be a huge, huge, huge asset as an edge rusher. And it's not that he hasn't showed it yet. I think in the brief glimpses that we have seen him, he has shown some production. My main concern with him, and I don't want to make this a whole and an injury episode, but you look at it, he was productive in his first game, his first preseason game. He gets a sack in the first preseason game against the Ravens, and then immediately hurts his shoulder. And I think we saw him grimacing and grabbing his shoulder a few times throughout the season. And you're thinking to yourself, well, this guy was noted as undersized coming in. He is limited in the amount that he's playing, and he's still kind of grimacing with the shoulder. So you're a little worried about durability. You're a little worried if he can take it that next step and kind of, I don't know if he'll ever be a 3-down like guy, but I think they do need that higher snap count from him this year with the interchanging as it is with Hassan Reddick out the door and beyond with Brandon Graham obviously being out the door after this season. So it was really good to hear that a guy like that going into year 2, having time to bulk up, having time to learn the system, and hearing that from a guy who's been doing those things and ascending for the past, it feels like Brandon Graham is still productive here 12 years later. 14 years later with the Philadelphia Eagles. So it's great to hear from him, somebody who's there every day, that these guys who they brought in are continuing to make strides. So I think Nolan Smith plays at a crucial position, and he's kind of being not overlooked from a talent standpoint, but just overlooked because of the names that have been coming in and out at that position. The last one is related to Nolan Smith, and at 3, I have Jalen Carter. This is as easy as it gets. When we drafted Jalen Carter and he fell all the way to pick 9, it was the craziest steal. He was probably the most talented person in the draft. The only thing that may have held him back is, 1, the character concerns, and 2, you draft quarterback first in the NFL draft. If not, if they were drafting based off of talent, he would be the number 1 guy off the board a year ago. So what we're looking from him is, this is not crazy to say, we want him to be at an Aaron Donald level of ascension here in the next few years. We want that level of production, and it's amplified by the fact that Fletcher Cox retired, so they need a new anchor there on that defensive front at defensive tackle. I think Jalen Carter can do it. Milton Williams is another guy I'd like to see step up. They've had preliminary conversations with him to get an extension worked out, but they haven't done so yet. If for some reason he were out the door, I think that becomes a very thin position there at defensive line and defensive tackle, and you're kind of anchored there by a very talented Jalen Carter. Now, Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, I think both ran into the same thing last year where it seemed like they hit a wall. The Jalen Carter you saw earlier in the season did not feel like the Jalen Carter that you saw. This is actually the easiest way to put it. The week 3 Jalen Carter in Tampa was not the wild card round Jalen Carter that you saw in Tampa. There were 2 different versions of Tampa Jalen Carter. And I think that was a little bit concerning to a lot of us. Is that a conditioning issue? Is that just because, the team flailed? The team flamed out, and everyone had a disastrous second half of the season. So how much of that is really him, and how much of that is really just the defense as a whole kind of just falling apart, not being able to get off the field? The secondary was, we'll say, banged up, to put it nicely, although they were there. They just weren't that talented. And every completion was completed. Defense can't get off the field. The snap count started to really wear on these guys, it seemed like, because they were just constantly on the field. How much of it is that? I am looking from a talent perspective from Jalen Carter to be one of the best defensive tackles in the game. The easiest way to put it, heir apparent to Fletcher Cox. Like, that is the level of talent that he possesses. I love the fact that he seems to study this YouTube film. He almost had that interception on the spike in the Chiefs game because he saw it on a random high school game that he watches on YouTube. I do think one of the knocks on him was passion for the game. It does seem like he loves the game of football. I don't really have a problem with that. And I, again, think he's probably going to be the most talented player on the field for this team for the next half decade. So you're expecting that level of production from him. And I think what you want to see, Jordan Davis is really he's brought in to be what he's supposed to be. And he was supposed to be brought in to be a run stopper in first and second down, to put teams in second and 12 and then get after it. Jalen Carter, to me, is more of being on the field. He can get up the field to the quarterback. He can stop the run also. He's more of a dual action type of guy there on the defensive line. So I think he's the cog to the machine with, we just named 3 different Georgia guys on that defensive line. Everybody included, Jalen Carter is the cog of the machine. I can't wait for year 1 to year 2 Jalen Carter and what we see, because I truly think we could see one of the most special talents in Philadelphia Eagles history coming from this kid, and I'm very, very excited for it. So that's it. That's my 3: Dallas Goedert, Nolan Smith, Jalen Carter. These are the 3 guys we want to take that next step this upcoming season, and they will do so starting a month from today. We'll have a ton of more content. I think we're going to start deep diving into these teams and do early projection looks, comparing them around the league to some of the other top-notch teams like the Lions, the 49ers. Where do the Cowboys and Eagles stack up against these teams? It's a little bit early to do it, but let's do it on paper while we can before they put the helmets on. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, make sure you're subscribed to Birds vs. Boys Pod on YouTube as we close into 1,000. Thank you to everybody who's been watching, supporting, and listening. We'll be back soon. Talk to you then.